Hi everyone, and welcome back to episode 3 of Demand Decoded. This live event series decodes the secrets of B2B marketing success. Thanks for being here today. We really appreciate you taking the time to join us. And we're Blend. If you haven't heard of us already, we're a B2B website and demand generation agency. And today, Phil and I will be discussing why lead generation is failing and the new paths that you can take to B2B marketing success. And hopefully the 3 key things that you'll take away from this, along with a lot of other good stuff, is you'll understand why lead generation is a failing marketing strategy. You'll know how to prove the ineffectiveness of lead generation in your own business, and you'll know how to pivot to a more sustainable marketing strategy. As we go along, please feel free to ask questions. Just drop them in the comments on LinkedIn and we'll pick them up as we go along. We've had some really great questions in the last few episodes. They make for some, really insightful, interesting conversations and discussions. Even if it's closely related to you or your business, it's probably going to help somebody else anyway. So if it's specific, that's fine. Pop them in, don't be shy, and we'll pick them up. So let's dive right in. And I think a good place to start would probably be actually clarifying what we mean when we say lead generation is failing, because so often in marketing, things are failing. So it'd be good to kind of clear up what we mean. So Phil, do you want to pick that up?
Sure. Hi Dan. Yeah, good point. So many things are supposedly failing. What do we mean? Lead generation, of course, is optimized around converting anonymous website visitors into known leads. And there's a variety of reasons for it, but usually what happens is the belief or the hope, or what we're told, is that if we convert someone into a known contact with whom we have permission to communicate, we can nurture them and nurture them through the buying process, usually by email or some other touch points. Typically, those leads are also going to be handed off to sales, so that if the lead nurturing doesn't work, sales can contact them anyway and try and close them. But it's a failing strategy because buyer preferences, buyer behaviour, has continued to change in a direction that we've seen happening for quite a few years now, which is buyers are savvy to what goes on when they convert. They're savvy to what they get in return in terms of the quality and depth of the information that they receive, and they're savvy to the events and processes that happen in the background. And so they're increasingly, and we've seen it for a long time developing, they're increasingly preferring to do the research, the pre-purchase background research, supplier selection, identification, and so on, anonymously. Do it independently using the various sources, because all the information they need is available somewhere without typically having to submit a form, convert it to a lead, and subject themselves to the following things that invariably happen. So they're doing more and more of their research outside of your lead pool, anonymously. They're spending less and less of their time actually talking to sales as part of the purchase process. It's a very important part of the process, and it still happens, but it's much condensed. And by the time it happens, a lot of the decision is made. So we saw this as early as 2016, 2017, that despite best efforts, buyers weren't responding to lead nurturing by becoming customers of our clients and of ourselves. And no amount of sort of iteration, change of strategy, change of tactic when it came to sending emails to nurture them along the purchase process made a significant impact on that. And so we saw that increasingly they were bypassing that whole part of the process, and when they were ready, they were turning up and raising their hand, making themselves known to us. But at that point in time, when they were actually ready to talk to sales, without having been one of those leads in the first place.
Yeah, and the point on lead nurturing. So often lead generation is followed with lead nurturing. They go hand in hand, basically. And the issue with lead nurturing off the back of generating a lead is that buyer journeys just aren't linear in the way that you nurture. They don't follow a traditional tofu, mofu, bofu content cycle. Buyers jump all over the place, and everyone educates themselves differently and follows a different path to purchase and consumes different content at different times. I might make a purchase and read a blog and then read 3 case studies. Nothing that I do there might indicate that I'm ready to purchase or indicate I'm at a specific stage in the buying cycle. It's merely just showing an interest in that content. And yeah, you just have to be aware of that change. Well, it's not a change, it's never actually happened, really, that buyers follow that linear process.
I think it's increasing in the degree to which the many different roles of the buying journey happen simultaneously and interchangeably. It's impossible to predict. And furthermore, in B2B, trends in what behaviors you can predictably rely upon when it comes to the purchase journey hardly ever appear. This has been understood and talked about for a long time. So the idea that we can map that to a single simple workflow of emails, or even a complex one, I've come across the odd 6-month and even a 12-month workflow every now and then. It's kind of it's illogical, because the purchase journey is so unpredictable and increasingly happening outside of our knowledge and outside of our database, as it were. So yeah, the lead nurturing email concept is really challenged now more than ever.
Yeah, absolutely. So I suppose that kind of forms the argument for saying lead generation is failing, because ultimately it doesn't align with the changes that have happened over the last few years in buyer behavior and buyer preferences. That's why we're saying it's failing, basically.
Yeah. And of course, that's conceptually understandable. But quite often we need to look for evidence or proof, don't we?
We do, indeed. So I suppose, what can you do to prove that your own lead generation is dying in your organization?
Yeah.
And I suppose the best way to look at this is to understand the effectiveness of the leads that you're generating and how they progress along the funnel from lead to MQL, SQL, opportunity, customer, whatever stage you want to look at. Knowing how they progress through that is the most effective way to understand what sources, what channels are effective for your lead generation. So I just wanted to share a little something, basically a split funnel analysis, which is kind of what is coined. I don't actually know who coined that term, but it's basically an analysis that splits your funnel in half, essentially, or in some way. You're splitting out low intent leads that haven't explicitly asked to talk to you, basically, and high intent leads who have declared interest in your product and are essentially asking to talk to sales or requested a demo, free trial, something like that. So this is one of the easiest and most effective ways that you could ever look at your lead generation success, basically. So there's a couple of ways to do this, and one simple way is to whack up a spreadsheet, basically. So what you can see here, I've popped in some example data, and essentially all you're doing here is analyzing lead sources, putting them in order of, looking at the funnel progression down from lead, MQL, opportunity, and customer. Obviously, like if you're using SQL or something, you could include that in there. And yeah, I mean, really, you're just looking at conversion between each step. So that cumulative conversion isn't working in MQL, but never mind that. Basically, what you're going to look at is your high intent requests, which is somebody asking to talk to sales, basically. How many of those converted into MQLs? how many of those converted into opportunities and how many converted into closed won customers. And then you're going to do that, split out your lead generation sources, and then look at those as well in terms of how many leads did you generate, how many MQLs were there, how many opportunities were there, and how many closed won, and the value of each of those. And obviously, you know, without looking at individual data, it's hard to know what you're going to see, but you're likely to see something like this. Your high intent requests, and, you know, it's fairly obvious, right? If somebody's asking to talk to you about your product or service, they're probably more likely to convert further down the funnel because they have literally, you know, declared interest in what you do. So you're likely to see that closed won from high intent requests is quite large, and it takes the majority of your closed won business. Whereas lead generation sources like gated content, webinars, in-person events, you can add a whole list of whatever you want in there. Content syndication, outbound, you might have an outbound motion going, and you can include that too. It doesn't just have to be marketing lead gen, I suppose. And what you're likely to see is, you know, these lead generation channels, whilst you're generating a lot more leads at the start of the journey, as you work your way down into conversion steps and look at MQLs, opportunity customers, that you've got way less customers, but way more leads. So just analyzing that really allows you to show the ineffectiveness of your lead generation campaigns at actually generating, you know, business outcomes. Lead generation is effective at generating leads, but it might not be that effective at generating revenue at the end of the day.
Yeah, just on that, when you look at which of your leads actually go on to close and at what rate, the result is often massively in favor of those high intent requests versus those leads, which, as you say, there's some logic to that, but the disproportion of it is usually shocking to some, you know, really significantly in favor. The proportion of, you know, leads that go on to close leans massively towards the high intent, and so much so that the cost and the investment in generating the leads, you know, can be called into question quite often, because the proportion of our effort as marketers that goes into generating leads, the sort of gated content leads, as you talk them, the non-high intent leads, so often dwarfs the effort that we put into creating those high intent leads that close at a much higher rate. So it's really interesting to look at this data to create clarity in your own mind and that of your stakeholders around where your investment should be going, around where you should spend your money, and what you should optimize around. And then final point before you move on, of course, is that MQL gets kind of caught in the crossfire of this debate a little bit. It's synonymous with lead scoring, it's synonymous with lead generation, and so quite often it's sort of described negatively, and I think the thinking therefore is that it can't be used within a alternative strategy, be it demand generation or anything else. But that's not really the case. You know, MQL, in my view, and I think you agree, Dan, is a perfectly good label for high intent leads that have requested that introduction to sales, gone as far as they can with marketing. But it's no longer useful to bucket together high intent leads with low intent leads and pass the lot to sales as one cohort as MQLs, because that will misguide you as to what the real conversion rate is. And that's where the split funnel analysis creates that clarity for you.
Yeah. And ultimately, if you're passing more high intent requests to sales, they're going to thank you because they're not wasting their time phoning people that have downloaded a few pieces of content and aren't actually interested in your product or service. They can spend more of their time with people who are actually interested in your solution. So yeah, what this really shows is where you should be putting your focus, what is having the best business outcome, which is high intent requests. And that's where you should be putting your budget, putting your focus on getting more of those.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to actually add in, if I remove this and share another way that you can look at this. So if you have some sort of marketing software like HubSpot, for example, which is pretty good at showing funnel analysis because they have a built-in reporting tool for that. You can do this within your marketing software very easily and use live data to be able to show this analysis. So just in this example, for example, I've only split out high intent and low intent, like the MQL funnel, but you could go as far as to split out different sources and look at the funnel by source. You can look at this data in so many ways. Really, you can then look at source by customer acquisition cost and lifetime value and sales cycle and all of that. And ultimately, it's all going to show that the high intent leads that you get have better, conversion stats across the board, really.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you do split it down by more sources, I suppose it's a great way to, gather information about the impact of your investments, because, in a multi-channel marketing strategy, you might have events, you might have industry events that you feel committed to attend or feel strongly support your your pipeline generation, but you can start to analyze those as a source of high intent leads, as a source of customers effectively, and know whether your investment there is showing the same sorts of results as your other efforts to create high intent leads.
Yeah, cool. We've had a question in here from Benjamin, and it's probably a two-parter, I think. So, good morning. I'm in outbound lead generation, maybe at a fintech company. My main goal is to generate the first meeting for sales using mail or LinkedIn sequences. Is there any other activity that can add to this strategy? Maybe start with that. Do you have any? Do you have a take on that, Phil?
Well, I mean, what we're proposing, as a focus for marketing is about generating self-identifying, self-qualifying high intent leads, right? It doesn't explicitly call for an outbound motion to produce that kind of result. So off the top of my head, not instantly, thinking about how to combine those strategies, but it's a very real challenge for businesses that have outbound motions established and have teams of people doing it. If you're going to refocus your marketing on not generating so many content created leads, top of the funnel leads, low intent leads, and you're going to invest the effort in the longer play to a degree of creating the high intent leads, there might be a time where you're delivering fewer leads to your sales team. So what do they do in the instance? And ultimately that is a key question to address as an organizational level about what's the best use of SDR time, if they're not going to be chucked tens or hundreds of leads monthly to call and try to book meetings with. There's a range of answers to that question. One of them is to focus on higher value customers, the enterprise opportunity, for example, or maybe you can plot your shift to high intent lead generation in such a way that they can be fully focused on talking to those people. But ultimately, I'm not a believer. I don't believe that outbound prospecting is a big part of the future of B2B marketing, because buyers are frankly so reluctant to respond to it.
Yeah, I think if you absolutely have to go down this route, things that you could do to aid this would be, if you're using LinkedIn sequences, I'm presuming in mail, to send prospects messages from those, I don't know, sales reps accounts that are sending those messages, make sure that they're active on LinkedIn, they're posting good quality content that's going to resonate with those people as well. Don't be too pushy in those messages. Be relevant, resonate with their needs, rather than trying to push a product too much. But yeah, I don't really have a stance.
No, be part of the demand generation engine of the organization is probably a good piece of advice, as in, while you're prospecting, while you're reaching out, helping to distribute the content that is aimed at the market that's not in buying mode, that's been produced by your organization is a great way to help drive the shift to high intent lead generation, which will make every sales team's job and lives easier, because the conversion rate to customer is so significantly higher on those types of lead.
Yeah. And in terms of an estimated end-to-end funnel conversion time, that's going to depend on your business, basically.
That varies massively depending on the purchase size and type. So no, there's no way to estimate that. But every organization can and should look at its own data to know what that is for them, and monitor it over time. Because one of the advantages of letting people self-identify and self-qualify is that often the time to close is quicker, because they're ready for that sales conversation. So it might take them longer to get in touch in the first place, or for you to know who they are, almost certainly. But their time to close could be quite a lot quicker than you're used to as an organization, because their intent is so high.
Yeah. So when you are looking at that end-to-end funnel conversion time, maybe split it out by source and actually see, okay, the high, like we just did there, in the split funnel analysis, and actually look at high intent form conversions have a much shorter sales cycle than outbound, in this case. Hopefully we understood that right. Let us know if not, Benjamin, but thanks for the great question. So in terms of obviously looking back at the split funnel analysis, I think that shows quite a difference in buyers, customers compared to leads. So Phil, like, what is the difference? Is there a difference between buyers and leads, or are they just the same people?
Yeah, well, I think there is a difference, and it's becoming more and more stark every day, I suppose, which is, increasingly leads and buyers for an organization that uses digital marketing to generate its pipeline are two completely distinct cohorts with only the slimmest, if any, of overlap. Meaning, leads who download content, who engage with our marketing material, who consume, and convert, so often don't go on to become buyers. They're part of groups that are not our future buyer, either because they don't have the ability to purchase, the need to purchase, they're not in the position to purchase. But it can be so that it can be so, excuse me, fumbling for words there. It can be so long until they're in a position to buy that you never see it happen, ultimately, is what I'm trying to say. Meanwhile, on the flip side of that, buyers are increasingly not becoming leads before buying. They're not doing the things that get them into your lead pool, onto your email list, into your workflow, your nurture sequence, until they are absolutely sure and ready that they want to have a conversation with your sales team or enter your sales process about your product. So, what you've got is a cohort of leads whom are the recipient of nurturing emails and outreach touches and so on, who are, history shows us, not going to become buyers of your organization. And then you've got buyers who are remaining anonymous, staying out of your lead pool until the last possible minute, when they're ready to talk to your sales team, and who do go on to become customers at a very high rate. So yeah, they are increasingly two very distinct audiences with minimal, and in many cases zero overlap, almost, no matter what we try to do. And no amount of lead scoring on a lead pool identifies people who are, shy but ready to buy, is the way I say it. They're performing all these actions that make it clear that they should want to purchase what we have to offer, but they're not ready to tell us that fact. But that's not truly the case. The people that want to buy are avoiding that and will wait, and will tell you when they're ready.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, going back again to the split funnel analysis, that will show you clearly that those high intent form submissions, those people have seemingly come from nowhere. They weren't in your CRM before because they hadn't become a lead in the first place. They just entered your CRM at the point that they were ready to talk to you about your solution, basically. And the leads that you generate ultimately never reach that stage. So yeah, often they're two completely different people.
Yeah, absolutely.
Another question from Chrisling, and I feel like I might have a stance on this, but I'll read it out. Hello, guys. I have a question. We all know sending canned templates are prominent here in LinkedIn. What advice can you give in terms of approaching a cold lead? How do you convert a warm lead to an actual client? I think the message we're trying to get across in this short space of time is probably that we would maybe take a different approach to this altogether, which is not to approach a cold lead and advocate on them coming to you basically through distributing content that's going to resonate with them and, you know, that they can relate to, build affinity with your brand, you know, have a connection with your brand, and eventually on their own terms they can learn about you, explore what you do, and when a buying trigger happens that they're ready to make a purchase, they know that your business can help them make that, or, you know, at least evaluate you in that decision.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, this is all in the spirit of inbound, you know, marketing, giving value before you take it, you know, attracting people into you. But it needs to be updated for the way buyers are behaving today, which is increasingly avoiding entering the lead pool, avoiding lead nurturing, not responding to the cold or even warm, in many cases, outreaches that happen on LinkedIn and by email, and doing things instead that let them form affinity and preference and trust, you know, anonymously, privately, and reveal themselves to you when you're ready. So yeah, I would concur that, you know, what we're advocating for is, and let's face it, we only have to ask ourselves, when we are buyers, how do we respond to these types of action? You know, it's certainly not the case that we respond to every single one we receive. In fact, most of us respond to precisely zero of the ones we receive. And the success rate at that method getting me or anyone like me to buy something is so low that it's starting to lose its rationale, I think. So
Yeah.
yes.
And yeah, I suppose the last point on converting a warm lead to an actual client, I mean, the thing is, we would probably advocate for not even knowing if somebody is a warm lead. We only know when they're a high intent lead when they actually ask to talk to you. When they're a warm lead, it might be that, you know, they've read a few pieces of your content, a couple of case studies, might have watched, you know, a few videos and whatnot. But really, you're not actually going to know that. And the thing that you're doing to convert them is providing them with even more content, a optimal experience on your website to help them, you know, navigate the best pieces of content to evaluate what you do. And on their own terms, they can then, you know, choose to convert into a client.
Yeah. So wait until warm becomes red hot.
Yeah. Cool. Obviously, we're going to run over again.
Yeah.
I'm just going to make it an hour next time. Anyway, let's keep going because this is, you know, such a fascinating talk, I think, and such a, you know, interesting topic for businesses. So we're not measuring on leads anymore. We've demystified that in the split funnel analysis. You need to focus on high intent leads, basically. And what else is there? If you're not going to be measured on leads, how should you be measured?
Principally on opportunities created and revenue. And although the data in your split funnel analysis was, you know, sample data, it was not unrealistic data, in the sense that not only is the conversion rate from high intent lead to customer so much higher than from any other type of lead, you know, the value of those is so much higher too. And so, you know, you are going to create more pipeline and you are going to be influencing or assisting more closed won revenue if you focus on creating high intent leads. And so the first and most fundamental shift to make is one of uniting with the other parts of the business around revenue goals, you know, because that's what matters at the end of the day. And that's what all your marketing effort will be geared towards if you adopt, these strategies. Now, the problem or challenge with that, of course, is that it's kind of like a lagging factor. It isn't instantaneously connected with the first touch anymore. It's not even connected to the conversion moment at the top of the funnel. You can start to get a picture of it when people express their intent and they reveal themselves, but it's lagging. So of course there are leading indicators that you'll want to use to measure the effectiveness of individual activities and campaigns and along the journey. But fundamentally, the best indicator of marketing success, however you go about it, is pipeline value and revenue.
Yeah, I think it's probably also worth mentioning attribution here, how you actually attribute those opportunities and revenue back to specific marketing channels or activities. The issue is with lead generation is that it goes hand in hand with software attribution, right? Anything that you do to capture a lead, like using a form, for example, can be measured and tracked by software attribution. If I was to, set up a piece of an ebook or whatever and gate it, your marketing software can track that by using, cookies and tracking data upon form submission. The issue with, not looking at leads and lead generation further down the funnel is that you kind of lose that attribution. You don't necessarily know the things that are happening on the journey before they, enter your CRM and your sales funnel, I suppose, as a high intent lead. So one easy way to do this, which has been talked about loads on LinkedIn and stuff, you've probably heard it already, is to implement self-reported attribution alongside software attribution. And what that is basically just asking somebody on your high intent forms only, because this is meant to look at the channels that are bringing in those high intent declared interest people. And essentially you're just adding a field on there which says, how did you hear about us? And it's open text, and you'll be absolutely stunned by the answers that you get in there. People go to extreme, lengths to tell you how they heard about you. And, what you'll often find is that the answers in there are a lot of the time quite different to what your software is saying. So, for example, take this event, for example. Somebody might have found this useful. They go onto the Blend website, they search for Blend in Google, they click on our website and, submit a high intent form, they want help with demand generation or whatever. Software attribution is going to say that they came from organic search. Whereas what actually brought them to the website was a live event on LinkedIn. Self-reported attribution basically allows you to capture that data, because you would expect them then to write in the form itself, in how did you hear about us, it would be LinkedIn Live. So yeah, you can then, start to attribute more effectively.
Yeah, self-reported attribution can help you understand what's creating the demand, which is really new to a lot of marketing teams and very, very interesting. On the flip side of that, software attribution is more about, it's more revealing about how you capture demand once it exists, right? And what's interesting about that is when you start looking at that attribution data through that lens, it can actually be better used to optimize those channels for capturing that demand. But when you're utilizing those channels with the belief or the intention that they create demand, you might optimize them in a suboptimal way. So it's really useful to have both sources of data available to you so that you can optimize all the parts of your marketing mix for the role that they perform best. And that might lead to a different use of paid spend, for example, and what platforms you use that paid budget on, what content you put there, and how you utilize them, and what you do with visitors and leads that they attract and capture. So it can give you a really new insight on which to make better use of those channels once the demand's been created. So it's not useless. It can actually give you a leg up in getting better results from the same or less budget in some cases.
Yeah, absolutely. Another question here from Helena. Great question, and thank you, Helena. Hi guys, would you make all the content free, no gating? We collect emails to send more useful content such as newsletters. Don't know if you want to take this, Phil. Obviously, we've done an event on this, but
yeah, the answer is almost yes. There is a time and a place for gated content. Certain formats of information don't make sense in an ungated context, so there is always, a case for gated content in certain situations. But for the most part, written content, especially video content as well, buyers are not going to convert to see it. Meaning, if it's gated, they're not going to see it. End of. You might generate a lot of leads, but they won't go on to buy, as we've discussed. These are two increasingly separate cohorts that don't overlap. So predominantly, yes, we would advocate for making all content free. We've done it ourselves. We've done it for clients. We've seen the positive impact. And on the subject of sending more useful content, such as newsletters, that's fine. There's nothing wrong with building an email list. And there's nothing wrong with offering a newsletter. But I would always make that an optional part of the process. If you have a quality newsletter, then let people sign up for the newsletter on its own merits, not because they downloaded an ebook or a piece of content somewhere else. And we also tend to recommend making those ungated pieces of content available for download, but completely optional and in return for very little information, as a method of giving people a takeaway version, a takeaway format, which some people have use for, and building an email audience who can, amplify and distribute your message if they see fit. So both can coexist. Both have their uses and advantages, but leading with ungated content is the best path to high intent lead generation and demand generation success.
Yeah, and we covered this topic in a lot of detail, probably like an hour event like this, which was all about gated versus ungated content, the best ways to approach that. So yeah, be sure to check that out. We can drop the link in the comments for sure. Cool. So we're not measuring on leads anymore. We're measuring on things further down the funnel, like high intent form submissions, pipeline, closed won, revenue. And I suppose the next thing to talk about is, obviously we've outlined why lead generation is failing, and now we need to cover the next part, which is the new approaches to B2B marketing success. So in our minds, pivoting from lead generation and aligning to the changes in buyer behavior, focusing on high intent leads, in our minds, that is demand generation, basically. So Phil, can you talk a bit about the difference between lead generation and demand generation, even the different meanings in demand gen, and how that's kind of the new focus for B2B marketing?
Yeah, I mean, it's tricky because demand and demand generation means different things to different people. There's one school of thought, which is that demand generation is everything that happens, right at the beginning of the process, awareness creation and so on. But when we started to introduce more of a pipeline focus over a lead number and lead generation focus, demand generation and the interpretation of it, which covers the whole purchase process from discovery to decision through to pipeline, felt like a great fit. And so from our point of view, demand generation is an integrated set of marketing activities that produce as much as possible friction-free journey from first discovery, when you're not in market for a solution, when you're not even problem aware, but you're encountering content and brands and building affinity and trust for some of them, all the way through deeper research, all the way through supplier shortlisting and selection. Who am I going to contact? Who am I not going to contact? All anonymously, because ultimately people, are entitled to their privacy and they're increasingly preserving it. And then from our perspective, being focused on sort of digital demand generation and inbound being predominantly a digital tactic too, providing a website user experience that satisfies the final piece of the journey prior to sales engagement, which is critical information to purchase being presented, an easy and intuitive website to experience and navigate, that's conducive to and encourages people to take that final step, that high intent conversion, to voluntarily ask for introduction either to the sales process or the salesperson. So to us, demand generation is that whole customer journey facilitated by marketing in an integrated way that isn't reliant on obtaining contact details and isn't reliant on the purchase process being linear, as we touched on earlier, but simply facilitates the whole thing, facilitates discovery, facilitates familiarization, facilitates trust building, and facilitates the hand raising conversion at the end of the process.
Yeah. And obviously demand generation as a term is quite ambiguous. If you literally Google demand generation, you'd probably get 10 different definitions. So is there a type of demand generation or something we can pinpoint to that is, that optimum method of generating marketing success?
Well, there's multiple ways to go about demand generation. A lot of people's instincts for demand generation are on prospecting, hence some of the questions we've had. It's about reaching out cold to people and booking meetings. Other versions of demand generation rely on, new forms of data purchase, with or without intent, for example, which is buying your leads effectively rather than generating them. For us, the preferred approach is an inbound approach to demand generation, which is to use your knowledge and your content still to show the value, the credibility, and the expertise you have in a subject, but optimize it not for lead generation, optimize it not for download and conversion, but optimize it for that customer journey, to produce that end result that you're after, which is the high intent lead with a high conversion rate to revenue, and a really healthy pipeline.
Yeah, love it. And I suppose, the advantages of doing that are that you're not wasting your sales team's time with leads that are never going to buy. You're only providing them with high intent leads that are ready to purchase. Buyers can remain anonymous because, they don't want to submit your forms and be in your lead pool anyway. It enables them to do what they want to do, which is not be contacted by you until they're ready to do that. And all of your content that can aid them on their journey is available and can be consumed at the right time when your buyer decides to consume it.
Yeah, I think it's kind of madness how much energy is expended by sales teams calling leads who data shows us are, very unlikely to convert. Their success rate is going to be, really, really low compared to the number of inputs that they receive. Nonetheless, if you've got a team that are doing that, then you are going to have a period of transition to navigate, right? Because they can't be turned from calling the leads and prospecting to working just MQLs or high intent leads overnight. So you might have to work out what the interim looks like, whether that's focusing them up market, whether that's dialing down resource, for a time, how you shift from the one model to the other model. But although that might be challenging, I don't think it's the challenge is any reason to continue calling, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people with a really low rate of return when there's a better way, and it's increasingly becoming more popular with your actual ideal customer.
Yeah. So lead generation is failing. Demand generation in an inbound approach is the way to go for B2B marketing success. So how do you make the pivot between going from lead generation to inbound demand generation?
So there's two sides to it. There's the strategic mindset shift that you've got to go through, and there's the tactical side of it. Do you want to take either aspect of that, Dan?
So in terms of, mindset and metrics, the first thing you need to do is ensure that every part of the business, all of the functions, especially marketing and sales, are both aligned to this change in buyer preferences, and appreciate that your lead generation efforts are probably failing and that it's time to take a new approach to marketing. And the best way to show this is through data, right? Show the split funnel analysis, do it yourself, make sure you dig into the data, go down to a micro level if you have to, looking at CAC, sales cycle lengths, anything that you do that you can get to, back up the fact that leads aren't converting into customers and customers are seemingly appearing out of nowhere without ever becoming leads in the first place. So all of your efforts to generate leads are quite ineffective. So yeah, first thing is to align as a business on, okay, lead generation probably isn't working as effective as we want it to. We need to make changes to our go-to-market approach.
Yeah. And if you've been successful in making that mindset shift and you've got agreement internally, then the tactical shift is far easier by comparison, I think. And I think I think of it as having two main components. One, of course, is, optimizing not for lead generation, which means moving away from gated content downloads and forms and so on, around your content, but optimizing for high intent lead generation. And to me, that requires thinking about all aspects of your inbound marketing, your digital marketing, as kind of a continuum along which the customer is going to have to travel at their own pace, backwards and forwards, in their own time, anonymously to you, but it's all connected. And so not only are you going to ungate your key content so that it can be indexed and read, you're going to think about social and content and how it's distributed there. You're going to think about the content experience and how content is presented and what CTAs you use and where to maximize continuation to the next step. And you're going to think about your website, its navigation, its UX, and its conversion offers, all as part of an integrated holistic whole. And when you consider those things all as one, you can start to see ways to remove friction from the customer journey and optimize for the outcome you're after. And that comes through making good practical choices around, template design, around navigation, style and content, around what forms you have and where on your website, what information you reveal, etc., etc. So yeah, I think it's about starting to think about the customer journey as a whole, and aligning everything you do really to making it easier for them to get all the way to the bottom, I suppose, of the funnel, for want of a better word, to the point where they willingly tell you who they are and what they're interested in talking to you about.
Yeah. Cool. I don't think I have anything to add to that. Well summarized. So I suppose let's wrap it up there. Hopefully you enjoyed this episode of Demand Decoded. I've just seen Dan's actually dropped the links on LinkedIn, so thanks for that. You can watch the previous episodes on YouTube, actually LinkedIn as well, or listen to them on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. This one will be up shortly. So yeah, thanks for joining us. Hopefully you found it useful. Be sure to follow this Blend LinkedIn page as well for the future events. And yeah, check out the previous episodes. And thanks for tuning in. See you next time.
Cheers, Dan.